Hi, my name's Jess Smith and I'm a Scottish traveller. I have written many books on my culture and they're all packed with stories. Stories are the way forward for the travellers to learn about their past. And many travelling families have kept these stories, crucially important gems, and they've shared them down through the years, going from father to son and from mother to daughter and grandparents. That's the story of the travelling people. And when I was a wee lassie, living on the road, my favourite time was sitting mainly at night when the day's work was finished and listening to the storytellers. Sometimes the stories were evil and wicked, and sometimes I used to think they're terrible stories to be sharing amongst the children, but they were crucially important stories. The way that travellers put their faith in the road and the earth. Sometimes the earth could be quite cruel, and sometimes people could be just as bad. So stories were important. Good stories, happy stories, bad stories, all kinds. That's life. That's what life is all about. For the minute that we're born, our story begins. We come into the world, we're just tiny little babies, and everybody will say, oh, look at that wee face, it's got its father's nose or its mother's ears, whatever. This story begins with you. And this collection of films that we have been blessed with is all thanks to a fella called Gavin Lockhart, who we worked with, the late Sheila Stewart and I, many years ago in Rattray Hall. It was through the Portrait Gallery, a National Portrait Gallery, and I have inherited the film that he left with me. And by showing you these images, you will see that there are people, my parents, Sheila's parents, and many other travelling folk, and each one is members of the story. I remember my granny, my mother's mother, used to tell a story about when she was on the road. And it was round about the time that folk spoke about the Burkers. Now the Burkers was just another name for resurrectionists, people who went around gathering specimens for doctors to dissect and experiment on. And if travelling folk weren't looked after under the rule of law, then they were easy targets. So many travellers would tell stories of Burkers. And the story that comes to my mind is when my granny had been hawking in Glencoe. And she had her wee lassie, wee Maggie, with her. She was only about 3 years of age. The older children were back at the campsite, seeing to things, maybe guddling a trout for the wee river that ran past the campsite for their tea. Granny was heading home. She'd had a good day hawking. Her bundle was packet onto her shoulders, when suddenly she heard a horse's hoofs, and a carriage, the wheels of a carriage. And she stopped dead in her tracks, and right away she took wee Maggie and hid her behind some rocks, pushed her pack in front of her, and she stood there and waited to see who was coming. It was a coachman, it was a fancy carriage, and there was somebody inside. Granny's heckles were up, for this was not anybody helping her, because they stopped and they said, what are you doing, woman? And where's their child? Saw you in the village with a child. Oh, my bairn's here. Why? What do you want? What do you want to do with my child? What do you want? Just want to have a wee look, said this man in the carriage. He had a lum hat. Good looking man, maybe well to do. And the coachman pulled hard on the reins and stopped the horse and said, let us see your child. Now my granny knew exactly what would happen to Maggie if he got a hold of her wee lassie. She would never see her again. In an instant the coachman was dragging down to get the baby off her, and the man had opened the door to get Maggie too. Instantly Granny held her tightly in her hand, and she pushed the side of the horse, the bit that she knew was very vulnerable, and she nipped it, and the horse raised itself up, causing the two men to stop what they were doing and say to the horse in the carriage. And when this happened, Granny went round the back of the coach and she was away into the boggy ground. which would lead to Rannoch Moor. She knew every single causeway and every paths that horses couldn't go. And when she told me that story, I could feel my blood running cold at the mere thought of a vulnerable woman with no men to take care of her at that moment, just her and her wee lassie, and her traveller's wisdom, her wit. And off she got, and she was free to have more children and to tell the story, and Maggie safe in the arms of her parents. So every traveller, wherever you are, you have a similar story. A story of scary people, a story of fear, maybe the police coming in the middle of the night, maybe drunken locals coming to throw stones at the camps, or your trailer, or your van. But everybody has a story. And it's important, really important, that these stories do not die. Because when a story's gone, the wings have gone from it. It's no use like a bird without wings. You have to keep sharing your stories. So what I say to all you young children or you young people there is, don't look at your phone and think about pop stars and think about modern world, but think about the story of your parents and your grandparents and spend a while with them asking the stories. And all you do is you just sit down and you just say, do you know what happened to me today? And it could be anything. It could have been a bully at school. Could have been anything at all. But just share it, because that opens up the memories in your parents' heads and your grandparents or your aunties or uncles or anybody at all, and get the story going. That is more important to the travelling people. Find that weave and weave that blanket, because stories are so important.